This is Whiskey Whereabouts. I'm Tim, and for 2 years I've been conducting an ongoing experiment with some bottles of Ardbeg, testing the impact of the different techniques that we employ when we are going to have whiskey around on the shelf for a while. You know what I'm talking about. Transferring it into these sort of smaller bottles to reduce the headspace, using the inert gas. Last year I introduced a second experiment that I got started, this time with the Parafilm. A lot to go over, on to the results. My whiskey journey has taken me to Scotland and back. I've explored whiskey education, tastings, and distilleries from Islay to Speyside. And now my journey continues here, with you, on Whiskey Whereabouts. So if you haven't seen last year's video, I'll put a link right up here so you can check it out. And in that video, I shared a couple of tastings I did over a 1-year interval. At 6 months, and then a year from these 2 bottles of Ardbeg Ten. I bought these bottles 2 years ago, and I bought them at the same time, same shelf, same shop, identical bottles. And I took the level down below 50% by pouring the contents of each into these 275 ml bottles. There's a little extra, poured that, just enjoyed that, just to get that level down below that 50% threshold. I treated one with the private preserve gas. This is that inert gas. And I left this bottle as is, and then I had the reduced headspace. Here, I have this bottle, which is now getting a little low because I poured a sample for a tasting I'm about to do. I have a second bottle that's untouched, so if I do this again next year, I'll probably use that other sample with that high headspace. Why did I do all of this? Well, there's a concern that people will talk about the whiskey sort of going flat over time. It's not going to go bad. It's not going to turn to vinegar like wine, but just losing some of its just quality in the flavor over time sitting. Particularly, there's this conventional wisdom that if there's more air in the bottle than whiskey, then this process is going to accelerate. I haven't had that proven to me yet. That is the conventional wisdom. And there's a lot of different perspectives on what the best method is. There's not a lot of consensus. So I decided to just experiment a little and see how this worked for me and how I responded to the different samples. So I'm tasting them blind periodically and then rating them to try to get an idea of what is working in terms of preserving them. Having had this ongoing experiment last year with the bottles on these Ardbegs in sort of 40 to 45%, I started thinking, what if this is accelerated? What if there's a difference here with a much lower level? So last year I introduced another experiment number 2 with another bottle of Ardbeg. I just got a bottle of this Wee Beastie, and I took the bulk of this whiskey and poured it into some sample bottles, enjoyed some of it, took it below 20%, nice and low. So I have a couple of these sample bottles, which I filled. Now the levels are a little bit lower because I poured some samples for today's results. One with the just headspace, and then since I had all this extra Wee Beastie, I decided to introduce another element, the Parafilm. And this is this sort of waxy kind of film that you can apply around the cap, cork, the stopper of your bottle to make a seal. See if that makes a difference. And experimenting is the word, because I have seen a lot of different perspectives from folks believing in one method or another. I have a feeling that your climate, the temperature, the conditions, atmospheric, humidity conditions in your home, where you store your bottles, which bottles are being used, all have a different impact. And I think each of us might have a different experience or a different preference depending on all these variables that I can't sort of build an experiment that accounts for it all. So what I did was I got peated whiskey because there's a feeling that the peated whiskey goes sort of flat or dull sooner. Starting over here, as I always do with whiskey number 1, do not know what the sample is, going in on the nose. Not very hot, not super smoky. Whiskey number 2's nose now. Get a little bit more of the smoke here, a little bit more of the sort of honey, kind of maybe vanilla sweet. Let's go to whiskey number 3 now. Has more of that lemon citrus that I think of with Ardbeg. Having gone through here, this middle sample is the most robust, I think. I'm getting some sort of cherry kind of fruit that's coming now as I return to it. I think this is the best nose. And then it's going to be this one, although it's a little sharp, it is also pretty robust. And then this one is the most subdued. Palate time, going in on whiskey number 1. Yeah, that ashiness, a little bit of pepper while you hold it. The citrus is there. The sort of that cakey kind of honey, then border on kind of like lemon cake. Whiskey number 2 on the palate now. More mouthfeel here. Less heat. There's obviously a difference here. And the flavors are a little deeper in the register here. What I mean by that is I'm getting some of the darker fruit around that sort of citrus. I'm getting some wood. I'm getting on the palate, you know, the more sort of vanilla than honey, but I'm not getting a lot of that tingly pepper as I sort of hold it. Whiskey number 3's palate now. This one has a lot of the ashy smoke to the point where it's pretty dominant in the mix, and you kind of have to unpack some of the other flavors. It's pretty on the nose for what I think of with the Ardbeg, the mix of the flavors. I'm gonna say this one has really held on to the smokiness. The other flavors are there, and I'm gonna say that this is the best. I'm gonna switch these two, so I'm gonna go 3, 2, 1, bring up the rear again. On to the finishes. Nice and long. It has a wave, starts receding, and then it just develops another wave. It's nice. That smoke is the strongest on the finish. The flavor there is not buried under it. It's leaning a little bit sweeter. There's some cast, there's a little tannin, but I'm getting more of the vanilla, almost a sweet caramel. Moving on for the finish in whiskey number 2. Pretty nice. Different. This sample, whatever sample number 2, has a richer, darker fruit. It doesn't sit high, that sort of high, sharp kind of citrus, lemon citrus. I'm getting that like I said before, a cherry red berry. The sweetness is chocolate now, with a nice sort of through line of that smoke. Smoke is smokier more than ashier in this one. It's very prominent. That fruit, that sweet is hanging right there. Long again. Moving on to whiskey number 3's finish. Very strong, a lot of smoke, a lot of cask. Some of that fruit's missing. A lot of the sweet is there. Long again. Okay, so these are pretty close. This one is last again. Whatever's going on here is the weakest of the 3 samples, consistently. These are close on the finish. I'm going to say it's number 2 as the better. It feels closer to what I think of Ardbeg 10. There is that red candy, red fruit element. It's still there here. There's almost a soapy kind of fresh, like clean, that is a contrasting element on the finish of Ardbeg 10 to that smoke, and this still has that as well. They're both long, they're both very solid. I'm gonna say 2, 3, 1. So checking my scores, this is the best of the 3 samples, although I did switch these palettes. So that was the only time this was switched. So this is the best of the samples, as they have survived after 2 years. It's the gas. So the gas sample has performed the best long term. The second place sample is the Headspace sample, and that is the left to its own devices, no treatment sample. So, what do these results tell us? I have not wasted the last 2 years. These have had an impact. And I was really surprised in my first video that the gas had a negative impact. After 6 months, I found that the gas maybe had added something, or for whatever reason, it had clearly set itself apart from the other 2 samples. But as I've gone longer term, the gas has consistently outperform. So last time it was the gas and then the standard left to its own device bottle. That was 1 year. And now that we've added another year, the left to its own devices untampered with bottle sample has faded a little. Again, subjectively to me in this blind tasting for what that's worth. Here, we had 20% for a year, so a lot more air in this bottle. Want to see what happens after 1 year, if that accelerates that sort of deterioration that we have observed in the Ardbeg Ten test. And also, I wanted to see if the Parafilm had any difference. If I could tell a difference between these two full Headspace, with one with Parafilm and one with not. Smoke is really subdued on this first sample. Pretty sharp, pretty fruity. There's some of that sherry, sort of brown sugar sweet there. It's obviously not a sherried Speyside whiskey. There's something sort of at the bottom here, this sort of ashy kind of peat presence, but not hot, even though it's a hotter whiskey with higher ABV than the 10-year. But it certainly doesn't seem dull. It just doesn't seem hot or smoky. Let's try now the second sample. Even fruitier, less of the rich sweetness, even less of the peat presence. It's not thin. It's almost syrupy. But yeah, as you sit with it, the fruit kind of subsides and it gets real sweet. It's brown sugar bordering maple syrup sweet. Let's try 3 now. This one's the hottest of the 3. Less of the sticky sweetness. Yeah, a little bit more perfume floral element. Little bit more heat, and now once that passes, okay, here comes that sweetness. Caramel. Yeah, rich. Condensed brown sugar sweet. I'm going to say 2 is the best of the samples. It's the richest. Then I'm going to say 1, and this is still pretty strong, but it does have a sharpness. It feels the youngest, and this one just feels a little bit more robust. Not a huge gap here. It's only been a year. 2, 1, 3. On to the palate. It has the smoke. It has this sort of that sherry sweet element. Whiskey number 2. This one's not as big as this one on the palate. It's more honey sweet than sort of caramel rich. The sherry sweet elements are there. The ash, very ashy. Whiskey number 3's palate now. This one's big. This one has a little bit more heat. It's spicy. It has oak. It has a little bit of bitter from that. It has the ash. The sweetness is there, but this is the most lively, untamed kind of the 3. This time we're going to say 2, 3, 1. On to the finishes. On whiskey number 1, there's more of that savory element. Sweet. It's a little sharp. Keeps going. Very long finish. If anything, this experiment has taught me, even after a year, with one of these samples sitting less than 20% in this bottle, this Wee Beastie is a very good value. First off, a very robust whiskey. It has stood up over this time. And this finish, it's long. It has the nice balance. It's the biggest heat, the biggest peat, smoke. It's the most savory, offsetting those sweet elements on the finish here. Yeah, whiskey number 2's finish is kind of faded a little. It's not as long. It's a little sharper. The sweetness is there. It has a citrus sort of sharpness to it. There's some cask at the bottom, but it is a little less of a big presence throughout. It's a long finish, but it sort of tapers. And I'm left with the smoke, I'm left with a little bit of bitter, and it goes to the sweet. Whiskey number 3, by far the most cask. This one keeps giving me tannic elements. Smoke. The sweet is condensed into chocolate. Sort of, not quite dark chocolate. It's not milk either. It's very rich. All the finishes just keep going. But this one has a little bit of more of the charred smoke wood dominance. I'm going to say 3, 1, 2. Sample number 2 is the best. It won 2 categories, but it bombed the finish, which is frustrating. This is just the Headspace bottle. This is just the standard Headspace bottle. And I really had to sort of look at this. What is more value? Winning a category or coming in second twice? I'm going to say if you can win a category, it's probably a little stronger. I'm going to say whiskey number 3 is the second, and that is the Parafilm Headspace bottle. So that means that the bottle Untreated is the third place finish. So we are having pretty consistent results here. I wanted to get into this. How this finishes ahead of the Parafilm, I don't know. It could be just the sample. This is all very, very subjective, and they're very close. There was a difference here. And I don't know if that means that Parafilm is bad. I think we need to kind of experiment with this a little bit more. Here, reducing the Headspace has preserved this whiskey for the better. And it's not like this whiskey was clearly terrible. It's only been a year, but the level was low. It did not come in first in any category. It came in last in only one, so it was pretty average. These seem to fluctuate. Again, this is an experiment in subjectivity. I am sort of just tasting them and responding to the whiskeys, comparing them. So this really only proves how I have responded to them. So your mileage may vary. I have found that 6 months in, the just leaving the bottle as it is performed pretty well. I believe at that first tasting, the smaller Headspace bottle outperformed. With each subsequent tasting, 1 year and now 2, the Ardbeg Ten sample in its normal bottle has faded fastest and has performed a little bit worse, where it really kind of bottomed out last place in this tasting. A year ago, it was kind of middle of the pack. I'm seeing a similar effect with the Wee Beastie, where the bottle with the low level, less than 20%, was kind of middle or at the back, never in first with the samples after 1 year. So unfortunately, it really does seem like you need to have an idea of what the different sort of techniques impact has at different time intervals for you to reach your optimal results. And again, you probably need to test this in your conditions on your own to figure out what that is. I try to keep special bottles, specific bottles around. So for me, it's worth experimenting with this. And I'm going to continue experimenting with these different techniques and report back to you what my sort of findings are. If you've done any of this, let us know in the comments. What are your techniques that you prefer? What do you trust? And what results have you had? And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe. There's a big button that's going to pop up right over here. And I will see you on the next one.